We're beginning a new series today entitled Attention, Please. Most of us have a friend or friends, you know somebody that they can do pretty much anything at any point in time. They're completely random people and they show no inhibitions whatsoever. Sometimes it's embarrassing. They're like, please stop doing that. You're embarrassing me. But they don't seem to be embarrassed. I was listening to a radio program, a sports program, and a guy by the name of Dan Patrick, who's a sports announcer. And he was talking about a time where he was at a party. It was a formal dinner party. And he happened to be there with the actor Bill Murray. And at some point, Dan Patrick, he came from the bathroom or something, or he had arrived late, or I forget what it was, but at this formal dinner, Bill Murray is standing on the table singing Broadway musical songs. That's a man with no inhibitions. No one here could probably get up and do that without feeling tremendously embarrassed. But there are people who they have no inhibitions. I'm going to be talking about some events in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament. But God demonstrates throughout the Bible, both Old and New, that He has no inhibitions other than moral inhibitions when He deals with people. His desire to get a message to people really knows no limits. He will do things that shock you, just make your mouth drop. Whoa! We're going to be looking at some of these examples, some of these very extreme examples of how God used people, and specifically, if we turn to Hebrews 1:1 and 2, he says, Paul writes, long ago, different times in diverse ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom He created the world. And we look at this phrase, diverse ways. This is a nice way of saying God shows no inhibitions. He will use lots of different ways to speak to us. And He spoke to the fathers, their ancestors, through the prophets. So we're going to be looking at 4 instances of prophets. Now, most of the prophets that, when we read a book of prophecy, they're all tremendously boring. Right? You know that. You know that when we read the Old Testament, we know, this is the word of the Lord that came to this prophet, and then this nation's going to have this problem, and this nation's going to have that problem. And it's so hard for us to get into that. But there are some times where we look at the stories and we go, that's really deep. If you let yourself get into these stories. We're going to be looking at 4 of these. Now, of course, one of them is one we're going to be going through today. We're going to be looking at Daniel. And we're going to be looking at 4 different lessons in this series that God needed to teach people. So we begin in Daniel 1, and we're not going to just be referencing Daniel, we're going to be referencing 4 people. This is Daniel 1:1 through 7. The 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of royal family and nobility, handsome youths, without defect, skilled in wisdom, gifted in knowledge, understanding, and learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace. And he taught them the literature and language of the Chaldeans, and they were to be educated for 3 years. And at the end of the time, they were to stand before the king. And among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. The chief of the eunuchs gave them Babylonian names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah, Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abed-Nego. Now, it's kind of interesting, just a side note, that Daniel always is referred to as Daniel. But these other 3 guys, they get their Babylonian names, which were, all these names are pagan names. They're references to deities and things like that. And they would have hated these names, but somehow we call him Daniel, and these other 3 guys get their pagan names, which they would have hated. But so be it. That's who they are. So, who are these men? Well, these are the brightest of the bright, the best of the best. They're incredible people, and it's interesting that they are on the ground floor of something that God is doing. And they actually ended up setting up a college, if you want to call it that, sort of, in Babylon. They were on the ground floor of, as I say, something really, a lot of what they did has to do with how we have our Bible in its form today, at least the Old Testament portion. From this, years later we will have men like Ezra and Nehemiah that are highly educated people and historians, and they will be the product of some of the work that these four men do. Now, we could talk about a number of great things. One, how God uses the very period of captivity and oppression to preserve the Hebrew faith. That would be an extreme thing. We could talk about the extreme nature of God using the very first vegetarian prophets. I mean, that's extreme. But that's not the lesson that we're going to be talking today. We're going to be talking about something far more dramatic. We're going to be talking about trust in God. Daniel, we're going to skip ahead. We're going to kind of back up as we go in this lesson. Because we're going to see two kind of elements of trust in God. Now, we're going to actually go to Daniel chapter 6. And this is actually after Babylon has fallen, and they're now under Persia's, or Media and Persia's rule. Now, the high officials and the satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. So these men said, "We shall not find any ground of complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Now, I want you to see something here. They say we're going to have to manipulate his religion to get to him. They're going to resort to law. So you thought that plots and things against religion were something new? You thought that manipulation of religion by the powers that be was something new? No, it is not. It's quite old. This is an old, established trick. Use the law to trap people who are godly people. In 2007, a law was passed, these SOGI laws. You might have just heard about it now, these laws that are dealing with the bathrooms, the bathroom issue, right? That's a new thing. Except that these are laws that are coming on the heels of things that were passed in the mid-2000s. You didn't probably know that. When they were first passed, they raised some eyebrows, but the language of these laws were written so that people would kind of not raise too many eyebrows. Oh, they're just about public offices because, separation of church and state and all that stuff. It will just affect government offices and things like that. Well, things have progressed a little bit more. Well, the language was written a little bit loosely, and it was written deliberately to do something. And that's what we're finding out now in Iowa. In the state of Iowa now, they're saying, well, this language actually does kind of include churches because it's a public place. So now a public place includes a church, and so churches now are having to comply with two parts of this law, or at least it's being pushed. Not just the open bathroom policy, but also a law that stated, well, you can't make people in the workplace and various things uncomfortable in public places with your speech when it references gender issues. Well, guess what? Speech includes sermons. And so now, the political pressure is on. If you thought this was new, it's not. It's old. Daniel dealt with this. We're going to have to find some fault with him in connection with the law of his God. And so they passed a rule. I want you to understand that Satan wants to exterminate anything that is godly. That's his goal, is to exterminate you. There's no soft pedaling this. This is what he wants. Daniel chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." Now the picture you see here is not an actual Babylonian law. Or it's not this particular Babylon. It's a Babylonian law. I've kind of thought sometimes that if we actually had to chisel out the laws in stone, we'd probably get a lot better laws, because, people wouldn't really want to waste their time on stupid laws. So I think it would be a great thing if we went back to actually having our laws written in stone. Anyway, so they came together and agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce a law that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except for you, O king, will be cast into the den of lions. As I said, Satan wants to exterminate anything godly. And if that includes people, then he will do it. If you think you're going to escape where you're at, you are mistaken. We look and say, well, that's over there. That's in Seattle. That's in Iowa. Listen, it's going to come to 2816 Madison Street sooner or later. And we better be ready, because that is Satan's goal. Now, this is supposed to be a sermon about trust, so let's get there. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house and opened the windows in his upper room that faced Jerusalem, and he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and he gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. And then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Now, Daniel could have laid low, but he doesn't. He could have closed the windows. He could have tried to go into secret and pray that, I'll still pray to God. He could have found a way to appease his conscience, but he didn't. He didn't try to hide who he was. Understand, Satan will find you. Satan will find you. It would have just taken another law. It would have just taken something. Satan will find you. You cannot hide. Daniel chapter 6, verse 14 and 15 says this. When the king heard these words, they had just brought to him news that Daniel was praying, and now here's this law, and you're going to have to, you can't help it. This is the law. He was very distressed. He set his mind how to deliver Daniel. And he labored until the sun went down to try to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king. This was a prearranged thing, in other words. They had plotted the whole thing out. Know, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and Persians, and that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. And this is where we come to the trust part. I want you to see that even political allies cannot stop Satan. The right guy was in office. Do you see that? This man wanted to save Daniel and couldn't. The right guy was in office. If we just vote for the right guy, everything will be great. Everything will be perfect. No, you're still going to have to trust God. In the end, the only way that we are safe is in God. We have to stop trusting all these other methods to advance the cause of Christ. We're hoping for other people to do our work. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No entertainment was brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So in the end, Daniel, his trust in God was used in this extreme way. Daniel's life, inconvenienced that it is being used, as you can see, to draw Darius closer to him. See, at this point in time, Darius would have believed that the God of the Israelites was just a God, and probably a lower one, and that whatever God he worshipped was a God that was greater and above. But his gods aren't doing anything that he can do, that he wants them to do. He can't. Their gods aren't being able to rescue Daniel. And so he's going to have to trust in God. Now afterwards, of course, he comes down and yells into the den. He says, "Are you there? And was your God able to save you?" And yes, my God was able to save me. And in chapter 6, verse 26, Darius writes this. He says, "I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end." The world has to see your trust in God to be convinced. If you close the shutters and try to hide, first of all, Satan will still find you. But second of all, you will not make an impression on anybody. Darius would have never gotten to this point unless God used Daniel in a very inconvenient way for his life and for his sense of security. Unless God had used him to show what it really means to trust. Trust is total commitment. We back up in time to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're not under Persia, but now we're back in the time of Babylon, which was later defeated by Persia. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. It looks strange here, this picture, this image of gold. It's because, as we read, it was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Well, if you've ever seen someone that's 10 feet tall and 1 foot wide, you get a rough idea. I've never seen that person. So it's obviously a weird-looking statue. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and the king Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather all the officials of the provinces of the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the statue and said, and the herald proclaimed out loud, "You are commanded peoples, nations, languages, that when you hear the music you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Again, you see the desire to exterminate anything godly. But there's more than that. Now, here's a couple of pictures. I'm not sure that this is the area. There's some question as to what this area is. Dura is apparently like Springfield back then. There's a lot of Duras. So, not sure that this is the one or the right one. You see this is just a little bit, 15 miles south or so of Baghdad, if you want to place this for modern day geography. There's this big field, and in this is this very ancient. There's some people that believe this is the original Tower of Babel. I don't know if that's true or not, but you can kind of get an idea of what this place would look like from this big field where you could gather lots of people, because this was going to be a great celebration, and set the statue up so it could be seen easily by everybody in this crowd. If you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. We read that, right? Well, this is the second chance. They've been spotted because this was, again, a plot. So immediately they bring these people up. And this is what he says. "What God will deliver you out of my hands? You know who I am? I'm Nebuchadnezzar. I'm a god." Because the rulers at that time thought they actually were gods. "I'm God. And your God can't save you because I'm a more important God." Well, if you're that richest guy in the world, you can kind of start thinking you're a god. Commitment. Total commitment. Now, there are two obvious answers that they can have. The first could be, let's make a deal. We will sing the first and third stanzas of your song, but maybe we won't bow. Would that be satisfactory? Some kind of deal where they can walk away with their conscience intact, but they've given in a little bit and they've saved their skin. I can find a way to justify my conscience. Make it not sting so bad. The other thing they can say, because we know the story, listen, you're going to throw us in. We don't care. Because an angel's going to come down and he's going to help us anyway, and then you're just going to see that you're no match for God. Well, the problem is with that, of course, as we're going to see, they didn't know the end of the story yet. Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 through 18 says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it is as this, well, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he would deliver us out of your hands. But, O king, if not, let it be known to you, king, that we will not serve your God, worship the golden image that you have set up." So there are two answers here, and it's neither the ones that we mentioned. Their answers are, we don't owe you an explanation, because you're not God. We answered to God, and you are not God. I don't even owe you an explanation of why we're not going to bow down. You're not even in the chain of command anywhere. The second thing, the second answer is, listen, we don't know if we're going to die or not. Maybe God won't protect us from it. He is able, but we don't know. Their total commitment was Faithfulness without a guarantee of protection. A lot of times we only want to serve God as long as we are kind of guaranteed protection. But there is no guarantee of protection. If not, let it be known to you, King, we will not serve your gods. We don't care if you throw us in the fire. We don't care if God doesn't protect us. We don't care. We are not going to bow down. There is zero compromise here. You do what you have to do. We do what we have to do. And God has used an extreme situation here to illustrate what He expects from us. You're surrounded by the crowd. Think of what that was like to be surrounded by the crowd. Have all eyes on you as the knees start dropping. And you're there standing alone. And then you're offered a second chance. Would you start to reconsider? Oh man, I can get out of this. What happens, as we said, when this does come to 2816 Madison Street? Will there be total commitment? In these two situations, we see that God calls Daniel and his colleagues to a unique service to prove a unique lesson. Total commitment. Daniel has to weigh his devotion to God over the pressure from those who hate him. In the middle of a crowd, thousands, God calls 3 men to serve him without knowing what will happen. How many people were there who cowered in fear but were later emboldened by these men's confidence? Men who gave in on this occasion but later on said, you know what, if those guys can do it, I can do it. I saw those men stand up and I saw God protect them, and I don't know if God will protect me, but He can protect me. And it's worth showing my devotion to Him. These men exemplified a verse in the New Testament. Philippians 1:21 says, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Listen, I don't care if you have a law. I don't care what your law says. If I live, I'm going to show my devotion to God, and if I die, all the better. There's nothing your law can do to me. Nothing. I don't answer to you. Have you ever wondered, or maybe you've thought about it, you've experienced a great way in which God has tried to reach you? An extreme thing. What extreme thing has God done to try to reach you? I don't know. Maybe He hasn't. Maybe you've just lived a normal life, raised in church, and nothing really major has happened to you. Maybe He hasn't had to show some extreme thing. These were extreme situations, and so He had to use extreme lessons. Maybe He hasn't had to do that. What great thing has God done for you? And I want to ask you another thing. How willing are you? How willing are you? What extremes are you willing to go to be used to reach other people? Nebuchadnezzar, that at least lessened his stance, became somewhat of a moral person later on. Darius, well, we know what Darius did. Made a law declaring Jehovah to be the living God. You know, God seldom does the same thing twice. We may not have a fiery furnace that we get thrown into. But are you willing, should dramatic times come, to be used dramatically? Are you willing to be used to show the people around here, around your world, what trust in God does and how great your God is? And you can do that every day. And you can do that every day. Every day people around you have dire circumstances from the choices they make. And they need to see the example of someone who trusts in God with their life, with whatever difficult circumstances that you live with on a daily basis. And we're going to close.